So again, uh, this is Jordan Peterson Tuesday, and over to you, Roger.
Perfect. Thanks, Shrikant. So today I'd like to talk to you guys about Jordan Peterson and subpersonalities. Now, if you went to the weekend meetup with John BB, you may have also heard this term, though they are very similar, Peterson's take is slightly different as he associates it with motivations. So the first thing I kind of wanted to do was have everyone run through a small little experiment just to kind of make a point that will then build up from there. So I'm going to actually share my screen. Give me 1 second. And can everyone see that? We good?
Yep, it's
perfect.
Good. Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to play this quick video, and I would like you to just follow the instructions as the video indicates.
This is the shell game. I'm going to hide this Hershey's Kiss under this cup, and the object is for you to pay attention and follow along and try to guess which cup the Hershey's Kiss is under at the end. Try to guess if it's in the left cup, the middle cup, or the right cup. Let's check the left cup. The middle cup? If you guess the middle cup, you got it right. So now we're going to make it a little more complicated. I've added an extra pair of hands, and I've added additional colors here. But that's only to distract you from the pink cups. The pink cups will always have, one of the pink cups will always have the Hershey Kiss underneath. So let's get started. So can you guess where the Hershey Kiss is?
Yes. The little rubber duck, yeah.
Right again.
Okay, so that's kind of the first test, and you may have actually been able to see all of them, although that is kind of an impressive task to be able to do that. However, one of the main takeaways that I would like to just point out is our capacity to be quite blind to things that aren't directly relevant to what we're aiming at, right? For example, one of the reasons you may miss the duck is because your attention becomes so focused on the red cups that your peripherals aren't really being activated by anything that isn't relevant to that goal. Now, I do want to take this a scale up now to real quick. The next video is only about a minute long. However, I do want to show how it can greatly be expanded. So let me see if I can, there we go. And this is an advertisement.
To test just how much attention the attention-stealing design of the new Skoda Fabia actually steals, we left one parked on this ordinary road in West London. We wanted to see if its sharp crystalline shapes, bold lines, and lower, wider profile would attract the desired level of attention. Will the 17-inch black alloy wheels stop passers-by in their tracks? Will the angular headlights attract the attention of other road users? Will a crowd gather to check out its fresh, sporty look? Well, not quite. But did the attention-stealing design distract you from noticing that the entire street has been changing right before your very eyes? Don't believe us? Have another look. Did you spot the van changing to a taxi? How about the scooter changing to a pair of bicycles? Or the lady holding a pig? Let alone the fact that the entire street is now completely different. Didn't think so.
All right. And the main point of those examples are essentially just to highlight what we call as selective attention. And the reason that this is important is there's two main takeaways for Peterson especially that are really important for this example. And he uses the original, for anyone who doesn't know, the original invisible gorilla example, which has 6 people passing the ball, 3 of them in white, 3 of them in black. And the same premise is count how many times the people in white pass the ball with someone in a gorilla costume walks right in the middle of the actual experiment. And I think it's around like 80% of people don't see the gorilla the first time. Why is this irrelevant? Well, first and foremost, it means that your perception is shaped by what you're seeking from the environment. And what that means is that depending on what it is you're looking for in the environment, it's actually what's actually visible to you. And then the second and more important thing is that we're actually blind to things that aren't relevant to our goals. So things that don't have anything to do and don't interfere with the goal we're currently trying to achieve don't even get processed, right? Because it's not a function. And so today I'd like to talk about how our views are shaped by our values, and how our values, along with our fundamental motivational systems, act out not as goals or drives, but they act as though they're subpersonalities, and what that means according to Jordan Peterson. So first and foremost, I'd like to start at the very basic level of perception, what shapes it and how it shapes us. So if you've come to the truth talk on Jordan Peterson, or the talk about the logos, you may remember that for Peterson, evolution is the base of knowledge. But essentially, for this case, all you need to really understand is how evolution shaped us. First and foremost, we were shaped as limited creatures, right? For the evolutionary process, it's not very interested in creating perfect beings or beings that can perceive, reality as such. It's only interested in achieving a very basic goal, and that is survive long enough to procreate. That is the basic goal, the basic game of the rules of the game. And it's very pragmatic, which then results in us being a very limited creature. We're actually the best attempt so far that's come about by evolution. However, we're extremely limited in our perception and our capacity to actually understand what's around us. Mostly because the senses we have, one only can detect a very small spectrum of what they detect, but also we have a very limited amount of dimensions for analysis to begin with. And why does that matter? Well, if we're extremely limited, as we are, then we're also limited in our capacity. So our processing power, how much attention we can pay, what we look at, is all extremely limited by evolution, mostly because we just need to survive. We don't need to be able to pay attention to everything or process all the information around you. And that naturally leads to one big problem. There's too much data in the environment. More than likely right now you're watching me through a monitor, but that's not all your eyes actually see. If you pay attention to your peripherals, more than likely there's a bunch of other things that you could be paying attention to, but you're not. And the reason you're not is because out of all those things, you've decided that this is the most important. for whatever reason, but this is the thing that I need to be on. And if you're not paying attention to me, all that means is something else has become more important than whatever it is I'm saying, right? And so Peterson talks about, this is his main case for why a value system has to exist and be intrinsic. It's the idea that the first question for any evolutionary being is, how should you act in the world? How do you survive in this world? And in order to act, it requires that you have a value system. And more importantly, a value system that's hierarchical. In other words, there's got to be something at the top, because that's the thing you'll actually do. And everything else is kind of competing to try to get to the top. But whatever it is that's at the top is what gets acted out. It doesn't have to be as rigid as that, but it has to have a structure somewhat similar to that for it to be a functional system that allows you to make one act or one behavior, at a time. And because of that, anything that isn't within that value system, or that isn't at the top of that value system, gets ignored for the time being while you're acting that process out. So if you, for example, are, and we'll talk here a little bit, for example, you're hungry, everything else that doesn't really have to do with your hunger gets kind of turned down. Gets the volume turned down, you're not really paying attention, it's not nearly as noticeable. And the main takeaway for this section, for the perception part, is that what we value actually defines what we see and how we see the reality around us or the world around us. All right. Shrikant, you got any questions?
Yes. So one of the most interesting notions I have heard about perception is that of affordances.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we look at what can be done with things. So this is something that you can sit on. So you're always trying to do something, and you're actually perceiving things not as world of things, but world of tools
Mm-hmm.
to support your life, your pursuit of your values. And there is a lot of like cognitive science and neuroscience basis for that. And I think it's a concept which is directly in line with what Jordan Peterson is saying.
Yeah, and I mean, he's spoken about that too, where essentially he notes that he believes that the world is first and foremost as a place to act. It's only way later, to once we rationalize and kind of separate ourselves from a lot of it, that we start to create the world as a place of things, right? But so from there, if we do grant that the value system, and there's no real direct claim as to how exactly it's structured, but that there has to be a value ranking, then what is it that's within that? And Peterson makes the point that's like, well, there's a couple of things that have to be in it. And there's a couple of things that science has already kind of detected. And those are the primary motivators, or the motivation systems that essentially maintain the body and keep the body alive. It's like those have to be. And all these are located within the hypothalamus. It's kind of where they originates, right? It's, yeah, right below the thalamus. But so I wanted to go down a list of a couple just to give you a general idea of what we're talking. And each one of these has their own separate circuit. So it's not like they're all coming from one different spot. Each time you experience one of them, there's a separate part of the brain that is activated when it's happening. So they're not interconnected. So there's defensive aggression, there's food intake and water intake, there's reproduction, temperature, pain, anxiety, exploration, visual, auditory, taste, abstractions, empathy, hunting, dominance, and social activity. And those are just a couple. There's, a lot more, but I just wanted to get a good range of them so you can kind of understand all the basic primary motivators that operate within you. And these are all circuits, but Peterson does note something that's quite important, is that calling them circuits is only a perception from the external, right? So when you call them circuits, you're essentially, okay, when you're hungry, this little part of the brain lights up. But that doesn't tell you what it actually is. It just tells you there's activity there that, is doing something. But within the consciousness itself, there's actually been a division in psychology as to how to conceptualize these, right? You can conceptualize them as drives. In other words, once this part is activated, there's something that makes you seek out food or seek out whatever it is you're looking for. whatever it is the motivation seeks. There's another one that's goals, where you either see or you fantasize of something and then aim to try to get to it. And the third one that Peterson really espouses, and he borrows this from the psychoanalytic side of psychology, he basically says, oh, well, you can just classify them as subpersonalities because that seems to be what they're acting like. So what does he mean by subpersonalities? Well, what he points out is he calls them one-eyed giants, but what he essentially says is, look, each and every one of these every one of these motivations seems to have their own priorities, their own behavior, their own strategies, and most importantly, their own frame of reference. And if you humor me, I'd like to go through a couple of examples just to kind of make it clear what he means by this. So everyone's been in this situation where you go in a bar and, you know, everyone wants to eat and you're not hungry. So you say, no, you know, I'll go and hang out with you guys, but I'm not going to eat anything. You sit down and, you know, about 10, 20 minutes pass by and everyone else gets their food, right? And there's all this food and the smell starts to come in. And suddenly you realize like, oh, no, I am hungry. I'm going to order something too. And then you order. Now, the person you were before, you've noted you're hungry, and the person you are after are actually not the same person, and you're behaving quite differently, though you may not notice. For one, your attention will likely keep going to the food around you, right? You'll keep paying more attention to it, you know, and you can notice anytime a friend's hungry because, you know, they'll be like, oh, that looks really good, or oh, that's, you know. And then the second thing you'll notice is that you'll start having a harder time paying attention to what's going on because your priorities have essentially shifted. You'll stop smelling the stale beer and throw up on the ground of the bar, and you'll start smelling the food that's next to you, right? Everything starts to get oriented towards food consumption. And the reason is you're now being your drive, your motivator, your primary motivator is essentially starting to take over parts of your system as the value system starts to redirect itself to what it is you're looking for. Another example is temperature, right? Everyone's been in a situation where it's either too hot or too cold. Now, you may say, it's like, oh yeah, but I could keep it under control, right? I could be, no, you know, it's hot, but whatever, I'll deal with it. But the issue with all of these is as you increase the intensity, you also increase the power that motivator has. So, you know, if it's 90 degrees in a room and you're dying, it's a lot different than, you know, 85 where you're just kind of starting to sweat. And you can keep increasing it. And as you increase it, it increases the actual effect and power that has on you, because it is a primary motivator that requires, it's an adaptation for survival itself. One of the bigger ones is also pain. Anytime you do anything that is painful, naturally you're going to react in a way that allows you to makes you be aversive to anything that is associated with pain. And finally, hunting. I think hunting is a really good one because it's actually purposely seeking to hurt something, which I think is very different from what we normally act like. So if anyone's ever hunted, the actual point is to kill something. And that then triggers a very different way of being and behavior and empathy than what you would normally see on most situations. So I also want to highlight that that's similar to how it seems that this thing kind of seems to take over you, these motivations seem to take over you. It's a very similar concept to what Peterson noted was what the Greeks believed. For the Greeks, they believed that we're the playthings of the gods. And, you know, one example is, okay, well, let's assume a soldier goes to war and in the middle of the war gets, you know, is taken over by the dominance motivator, right? And does things that he couldn't believe that he would ever do. Well, the next question is, well, what happened? Well, he became something that he didn't recognize, and it was something that has been around way longer than he has, will not die when he dies, and seems to have full control over him under certain places, certain times. It's like, why would you not conceptualize that as a possession from a god? And so one of the main things that this means then is that the primary motivators, when activated, they control your perception and control your reality, right? They are the people that define, or they are the things that define what it is you actually see in the world. So then the next question becomes, all right, but if that's the case, which one of these primary motivators was I using when you guys did the experiment at first, right? When you guys had to follow the chocolate kiss under the cups, there's no drive or motivator for that specific task. So what's going on there? And this, where Peterson notes, is actually we also have the capacity to make our own subpersonalities. We can actually shape them and create them quite almost instantly, right? Within a couple of seconds of me showing you that video, before the video even starts, you're already primed. You know it's going to be a new weird task. The instructions appear, and before the task even starts, you've already created a little subpersonality of how to do exactly that task, right? And more than likely, you've taken it from previous experiences, right? There's no real other information source that you could use to create that personality. So you have to kind of go to your previous experiences to create it. So essentially what you've done is you've created a Frankenstein subpersonality of what it is you need to get done today, considering the things you know so far. And what's interesting here is that once you've built that little Frankenstein one-eyed giant, as you do it more and more often, it becomes it becomes stronger. It becomes more reinforced. So here's where I'm going to get more into the practical end of things. And for Peterson, he kind of sums all this up in the quote of, be careful what you aim at, right? And he considers the idea of sin as, missing the mark. And why is that important? Why is that a symbolic gesture? Why is that a symbolic saying? It's because as you build those sub-personalities to meet a certain goal, they become more efficient. And each time they become better at achieving the goal, and they also attain more information for modeling for future behavior. So essentially, hunger may be a little bit of an easy one, but for example, reproduction, right? Especially with boys, because boys tend to normally have to be the ones that pursue. We've all seen, really young boys, when they first get interest in women, they don't really know how to approach it. They don't really have any actual strategy. And then you can see, by college or even older, some of them have had a lot of practice, and you can see that they've developed a strategy that's extremely effective at being charming, at being funny, at being all the traits that they have designed for themselves that have become almost automatic, right? In their response, in their humor, and their flirting. So one of the things that Peterson really points out is that anytime you start a new complex thought, first and foremost, it takes a lot of cognitive power to process it. So if you're starting to play piano, you're going to be focusing a lot on every single key, and it's going to be exhausting. And that's why starting new things is actually normally very, very exhausting, is because each and every move has to be conscious. You have to choose which key to play every single time. And that, can very quickly burn you out. However, what happens is as you do it more and more, it goes from the front of your brain, the activity starts to happen more and more in the back. And as it happens more and more in the back, it starts to get codified into long-term memory. So what happens is as that starts to happen, your brain structure starts to encode that pattern and that behavior and that personality, essentially. And then how Peterson conceptualizes it is as you've essentially built a little tiny machine that is really, really good at only one thing. So why does all this matter? Why am I telling you all this? Well, because there's two very important takeaways from this. There's an advantage and there's a danger. The advantage is you actually control what you aim at. What you choose to do actually will define who you are in a very literal sense, right? As in, the more it's practiced, the more control you have over your own brain structure, over what you've specialized yourself in. If you want to do more of X, the more you do it, the more it becomes a part of you. So the good news is you're in control. Now, here's for the bad news and or danger. Imagine you create a one-eyed giant that's sole purpose is to score cocaine. now you have a big problem, because for the brain, the task is irrelevant, right? It assumes that your consciousness is going to be choosing whatever is best for itself. That doesn't necessarily have to be true, especially in drugs or any other form of addiction. So let's say you have, your brother's recital and your urge to do cocaine. Now, the scary part here is you may say, it's like, well, one time, I'll just do some coke first and then we'll see, right? But in doing that choice, what you've actually done is trained your brain what's more valuable. You've had the family duty, which you have neglected and have shown is not that big of a priority, and you've rewarded and strengthened the cocaine-seeking behavior that you've created within yourself. So the scariest takeaway of this is those things don't go away. Once they're codified in long-term memory, that machine doesn't go away. And this is also why for Peterson, addiction is extremely hard to get rid of, because you can't actually defeat it. All you can do is create another one-eyed monster that essentially every time your first one starts to rise up, it comes up and dampens it again. But as he points out, he's like, but that only works as long as you have your things together. The minute you get stressed, the minute you're exposed to a lot of old stimuli, the minute the cocaine seeking program knows that it's in a familiar territory, it'll just break right through. And that's why there's so many relapses in addiction. It's because you've already essentially trained your brain to be cocaine seeking specialist. So the minute you see any cue that tells you, it's like, hey, the thing you're really good at is right here and you could easily do it, it just breaks right through and goes onto its automated task. So why is this scary, at least for me? Because every single decision, it means that every single decision defines you. In a literal sense, every single choice you make becomes a reinforcement for a personality and a motivation. And it eventually, if you do it long enough, also for your brain structure, which means that even every single small correct choice you do, every single small correct choice of things that you wanted to do, is a small nudge to you becoming what you want to become. However, the same goes for the opposite. Every single failing you do is a small nudge and becoming what you don't want to be. And finally, just to give you guys something to talk about and something that I think would be interesting in a more group setting, talking about the subpersonalities and the question of, well, what happens if we just satiate all of them, right? If we give all of them everything they want, so they all shut up and they stop trying to control us. And for Peterson, he notes that actually, when you do that, you become slightly curious and you become exploratory. You start to look around and all that. And evolutionarily speaking, makes sense. If you're completely satiated, it's like, well, don't just lay around there, like go learn something else that might help us survive later on. And the bigger issue here is that this is also where Peterson kind of points out that there may actually be some shadow there, some parts of you that you may not quite know or understand. And the reason is our entire modern society, our schools, our work, our homes, our buildings, everything, all of society is designed to keep you satiated, to already keep all of those satiated. And the idea that you know yourself and that you understand yourself may actually just be that you only know one sub-personality that you've actually embodied most of your life, or that the other, sub-personalities that take control are very quickly satiated and quenched. We don't know, you may not know what people are like or what you are like in very different circumstances. And I think that's very relevant, especially today with COVID and everything else happening. We don't quite know what happens if people stop getting food, or if people don't have access to some of the things that they need to have access to. And they likely would not be the very same people that they are now. But with that, I think me and Shrikant wanted to talk a little bit more about subpersonalities.
Yes. So one of the ideas that I find really fascinating is to think of everything in terms of personalities, because what happens is that like we naturally can think of things in terms of people, because like a people or a personality is an integration. It is not just an idea or an action or a particular emotion. It's like this entire complex of values and premises and emotional makeup and the range of actions. So it's like a whole package, and it's not a pack, it's an activity, you know, it's like a so I think thinking in terms of personality is very powerful. And so that was one first point I want to make. What do you think? Because what it does is that instead of kind of breaking things up, like if you're looking at a particular emotion or particular action, you're kind of breaking like this entire complexity of human being into just along one dimension. Whereas when you think of it as a person or personality, there is this entire integrated system that you're thinking in terms of. And I think it's a very powerful way of thinking about things.
Yeah, and I think it's a much more comprehensive way of conceptualizing like our framework, right? Where it gives the ability of our behavior to be much more flexible, right? As opposed to just being driven or just having a situation like that. It's, well, no, instead of doing that, let's just make it so that the main thing that the organism can see is the thing we're after, and then give it motivational incentives to pursue that thing that we're after, right? And then like it limits and prioritizes visually what's significant. Well, it's not just visually, but all senses. It's precise in that way, but then it allows it to be extremely dynamic when it comes to behaviors on how to get there, right? And how to adapt to that situation, rather than just assuming, oh, well, like we already have all the behaviors and everything, and once we're driven to that, we'll just use that to navigate everything. It's like this much more specialized. The personality itself, each time it does that, is also learning how to better do that and how to better get whatever it is it's seeking.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, one particular example of it, which I find really powerful, is the phenomena of hero worship. Because what happens is that, you know, we are not born knowing what we need to do. And I think having heroes or having role models or having art is a way of projecting a personality so you can aim towards it. So it's not a particular value that you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve a certain character, certain way of being. So
Well,
that is another place where I think it's very powerful. Go ahead.
yeah, well, that's what I think that's what we'll be talking about next week. But for hierarchies, but the main idea is, okay, we have all, if we have all these little sub personalities within us, well, how are you supposed to organize them, and how you're supposed to control them and put them in order? And the idea is, well, the hero is the one that figured that out. The hero is the one that got it right, and it's like, or got it right for this scenario or for this situation. And then it's like, okay, well, is there a way that I could organize all of these so that it works in every situation? And then that's where you start to get more of a messiah figure, right? It's like the perfect man or the perfect person. It's like, how did they organize all this mess that I have inside me? And that's kind of the abstraction of the abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Is that it's more of a modeling of personality by how you should organize your sub personalities.
Mm-hmm. Now, one really powerful system of thought that I've seen about thinking about motivations is by a neuroscientist called Jack Panksepp.
Mm-hmm.
He has looked at these 7 different emotional circuits. Jordan Peterson is a very big fan of Panksepp. Yeah. And that's a very powerful notion. And that's what it kind of brings us to the point of kind of multiplicity, that it's not just this one thing. You're not just one thing. You are, as a living being, as a complex living being, we need to be able to respond in multiple ways to a variety of situations. So our emotional makeup, and this is not just even at the human level, this is at the at the mammalian level. So you have these circuits, according to Panksepp, I think he's done a brilliant job of seeking and of rage and fear, of panic, of care, lust, and play. And each of them has their own role. But when you kind of look at individuals, some of these circuits are more dominant in them, as a matter of course than others. So they have, each person has a different profile, but at the same time, all the circuits exist. And depending on the context, they come into play, and each of them has their own kind of characteristic pattern. So that's another kind of large area, about motivation that I wanted to just bring up.
Yeah, because I think that fits very well with the idea that I guess I should have mentioned. So because they originate in the hippocampus, the hippocampus is very, very old as far as evolutionary wise when it comes about and where it exists within the evolutionary timeline. So it's actually it's a lot more spread in the animal kingdom than just humans. One example he gives is the cat, where you cut out almost all of its brain except the hippocampus, and it can still act like a normal cat. It can do just about everything that a normal cat can, except I think the only thing that makes it different is that it's extremely exploratory, and it's almost like it can create these different personalities. It just can't store the information that it learns. So then it's just constantly looking for new information that it can't store. But it actually functions totally fine, almost with most of its brain gone, which is a very weird thought to have.
Mm-hmm. Now, the last point I want to make, and then we'll go to questions from everybody. Folks, you can keep asking questions by either typing the questions or typing exclamation mark, or by raising your hand in Zoom. So the last point I want to bring up is about the presentation that we had on Sunday by John Beebe and Richard Owen on the archetypical model. And basically what the 8-function model is saying is that these functions that we have are kind of associated with the way we use them is in this archetypical manner, or according to different personalities of a hero or a father or an eternal child or anima or a demon, or so that's a very powerful, and it's a much more complex model than what Peterson is talking about, and it's a much more integrated model. So it's kind of like takes the family of saying, there is you, there is your parents, there is your spouse, and there is your children. And they are of kind of two different varieties, kind of positive and negative. And you have all of them playing different roles. So that model it's a very rich model of personality, of saying what is going on within you, and far more systematic, I would say, than what Jordan Peterson has. So what did you think of that presentation, and what do you think of that approach to thinking about subpersonalities?
Yeah, I thought that was actually a brilliant approach. Actually, I have on here I don't know if you can see it, but like all the different types and the personalities that they created. But I was actually I've been thinking about it a lot since the presentation. It is a very different model than for Peterson, but like you said, it's much more articulated and systemic. Yeah, I guess the difference is for Peterson, he doesn't really identify each circuit's own personality. He simply points out it's like they act as though they are personalities. They act with the dynamism of a personality. And I think John Beebe takes it further and says, look, we have as Jungians, you have a general structure of personality, and actually the personality that I'm in is can be directly reflected in the opposite way with everything else that's in my shadow that also is embodied by my anima. And if anything, my anima is the one that carries that personality. And then, the secondary is, well, my the parents, and then the tertiary is, well, the child. And this idea that I found it a very extremely a very, very articulated idea that was very interesting. But I would have to say I'm not familiar enough to be able to talk too much in depth about his idea. I just find it very, very interesting though.
Wonderful. All right, let's go to questions from everybody. So it's going to be, folks, we have 4 simple rules that we have used for past 3.5 years. Number 1, raise your hand when you want to talk. You can either ask a question or make a comment. Rule number 2, keep on topic. Rule number 3, be brief. There's a lot of people. I want to get to as many questions and comments as possible. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree with anything anybody says, but do so courteously. Okay, so next up is going to be Carl, then David Edelson, and then Ritesh. Go ahead, Carl.
Hey, Roger, I really appreciated your presentation.
Thank you.
It's, can you also add something about the dopamine feedback loop? Because it would be really cool if you could just say, I'm going to design my personality, my collection of personalities to be really powerful and do a bunch of things, but whether those things actually get programmed into as repetitive routines really depends greatly on your success level or like your experience of progress. So if you have a great experience, then it's going to like feed back into that loop to program it. If you bomb out, then it's not going to work very well.
Right. Yeah. So that's a great point. That's actually something I should have added. So I'm glad you brought it up. So Peterson actually notes something about that, and that is the idea that humans are kind of strange in our motivations, because there's 2 basically dopaminergic rewards that we normally receive. The first is consumatory. In other words, it's a cessation of something that's motivating us. So essentially, if you have that hunger or the food consumption motivation up, it's actually somewhat of a discomfort. It's almost like it's the monkey on your back, right? The thing that's kind of pushing you to do something. And that goes away once you actually give it what it wants. So once you eat, okay, that thing goes away. And you have a sense of release, and it's actually a reward system that gives you. But Peterson notes something that's actually very peculiar about humans, and that is we have a second reward system, and that reward system is more from the cybernetic approach. And cybernetics just means I postulate a goal, and then I measure how good I'm doing by how close I'm getting to that goal. And when you notice that you're getting closer, you get a kick of dopamine also, but you actually get a stronger kick of when you notice that you're slowly getting closer to your consumatory reward than the reward itself. So the idea is if you go and try to get a PhD, you'll actually feel a lot better as you get good grades on your papers, on your thesis, on all that. Those will actually be bigger rewards than when you finally graduate. Because when you finally graduate, it almost collapses the entire structure, and now you have to create a new one. But as you feel progress, that gives you a sense of reward, which is also, for me, the most obvious example is video games. The reason video games are extremely addictive, especially like if you played some of the modern games where it's just constantly adding, like the adventure never ends. It's just adding more and more things to do, and then you're just burning time, but that level up bar just keeps going up. And you just, each time you level up, you're like, oh yeah, it's the fake sense of progress that video games can give you.
Thank you very much. There's one of the things Peterson said a couple times is nearly all the positive emotion you're gonna experience in your life will come as a result of having a goal and seeing yourself moving towards that goal.
Yeah, which is good and scary.
Okay, next up is David. David Elson, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Roger, for this presentation. Very interesting as usual. I mean, this isn't directly related to Peterson, but I was curious about what's now called dissociative identity disorder. previously called multiple personality disorder. And so this discussion about having these subpersonalities and having these, different, sort of, processes, different identities, maybe depending how physical you really just consider them to be. If there is any, if you're aware through your other work and research of an association with because if you, my very cursory understanding of DID is that there really are physiological differences, and then one can see in the brains truly different parallel identities going on that actually are operating simultaneously, as opposed to being a coherent in a normal person. And so I was thinking with these separate identities, or these separate personalities you're talking about, if that's really how physiological can it be of these truly separate identities that we humans, normal neurotypicals are able to cohesively meld together, and that dissociative identity really has these subpersonalities as completely independent, parallel things that take over and really completely push away, as again, you were saying, creating a new entity for this task. But then as part of a larger task versus with DID, it's really completely overwhelming the other task, or swapping back and forth between these identities.
Yeah, right. And I'm beating myself up because I can't remember the name of the psychologist. But while I was doing research for this talk, one of the really good quotes that I came up with that I saw was something around the likes of, the only difference between everyone else and people with multiple personality disorder is their ability to integrate the different experiences. So the idea is that, like, the only difference between us, who seem to be experiencing everything all at once as one entity, and the people that seem to experience it separate, is that it's almost like the ego kind of starts to break apart into its sub pieces, essentially. And then those kind of now are just constantly fighting, trying to take control of the full system. But yeah, I mean, that is one perspective, but like with anything in psychology, it's not the only perspective. So
I know. I mean, not again. I know that Shrikant definitely doesn't generally like follow-ups. I'll just sort of say, creating these tasks, as you're saying, and these physical, where it's initially difficult to do, and then it becomes sort of an autonomic task. Then that same way, those autonomic tasks and those circuitries you set up, if those are related to these dissociative identities, if these truly are independent physical parts of the brain, because you've now taken this this complicated task that you really initially needed to focus on or have as a target, and made it more, you repeat it, you reinforced it, you made it more autonomic, you put it in the back of the brain, and now this is truly an independent circuit that's, as you said, with neurotypicals, it's actually coherent, and with DID, it never was integrated.
Yeah, so one of the ideas that you can do is just, I mean, you can kind of experience this yourself if you'd like. Anytime you talk to yourself and you're taking two perspectives within the same conversation, right? Like, that's essentially what you're doing. The only difference is, for the disassociative, is that they disassociate from each other. So it's no longer me talking to me. It's me, Roger, talking to Dodger, or whatever it is that's my second personality that's manifesting different behaviors, but still also being able to fully embody me at the same time. So one of the weird things is, if we're made up of subpersonalities, then what is it that's actually you, right? That's kind of the weird question that underlines all of this.
Next question is from Ritesh. Ritesh, go ahead.
Hey, Roger, thank you for the presentation, and Shrikant for organizing it. Much appreciated. Roger, this presentation you gave about the multiple personalities, that is very similar to many, not all, but many Buddhist traditions, how they view, they call it sankharas, or
the monkey brain.
The monkey, but how the behavior is built up, and each time you allow it to happen, you are strengthening that circuit. It's a very similar language. It's very interesting. It'd be awesome to see someone who gets both of them to do a comparison. My question is, what material from Peterson do you recommend that actually digs into this? And then can you reach further back and also recommend something in the Jungian tradition that joins up with it?
Yeah, so I would say for me, the best, and it's actually a perfect time to plug the other meetup we do, or I do. I actually run a study group for Maps of Meaning on every.
Okay,
Sorry,
just a second.
I got disconnected real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, every 2 Saturdays, we run a small study group for Maps of Meaning. But I would say that Maps of Meaning, especially, I like going to 2015 Jordan Peterson, or I call him Fat Jordan Peterson, because before he started all his diet, and he's just chugging Diet Coke the entire time. But I really feel that he really dives into his material a lot better, because I think he's not as secure that everyone already knows what he's talking about. So he really goes into fine detail. But I would say Maps of Meaning, and we're actually going to have a talk. We're currently on the 6th or 7th lecture now, but I invite anyone who is interested in diving deeper into this. I promise I don't talk the entire time. I much more mediate the conversation. But I would say for Jordan Peterson, if you really, really want to dive deep into it, I'd say Maps of Meaning is, his tome of, that's both amazing and very, very thick and hard to get through. As far as Jung,
Folks, Roger is having trouble. Give me just a second. Looks like he will come back in a minute or so.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's going on. I keep
There you
getting
are.
kicked. Yeah, and as far as Jung, I would probably say you'd be better off reading his book on typology, which is his own personalities, and then kind of going into probably John Beebe would probably be the closest that I've seen that gets really close to perceiving the full system as made up of subpersonalities.
Oh yeah, I mean that's definitely, I mean, on that, and that is actually far more developed theory of how subpersonalities work. And actually we did a full presentation on it. I will put a link to it in the chat. And actually this guy, Richard Owen, did a presentation. It's the best thing I've seen on that theory. And then John Beebe himself, who came up with that model, was there, and he commented at length on it. So it's something really, really special. So and there, with Jung and with John Beebe building off that, subpersonalities, they take it to a completely new level, because what they are doing is that they are looking at it as a system. They're saying that to kind of give it to you very briefly, you have a hero function. That is your go-to function. That's your primary function that you're focused on most of the time. And that's what you're doing most of the time. But in addition to that, you have a function that is guiding you, which is your father function. Notice I'm talking about it from the perspective of a man. So you have a father function which is guiding you in a loving way. Okay. So those are the two functions that are kind of the most prominent, or these two personalities which are the most prominent in your character. But in addition to that, you have a third function, which is like an eternal child function. Now, this is not as well developed as the hero function or the child function, but you actually like it a lot. So it's kind of immature, it's delightful to you, but it's not fully developed. And then there is an anima, which is like your spouse. It's like the thing that completes you. So you have those kind of four functions as your more conscious functions. But in addition to that, you have these four other characters, which are, which he calls opposing personality. It's easiest to see in terms of like the father and the child. So for example, just like you have father, you have like what he calls a senex, which is like a critiquing father. Your second function, which was the father, is a lovingly supporting and guiding function. Whereas this function is like critiquing function. It's saying, what are you doing? You're doing everything wrong. So that kind of a subpersonality. And then just like you have a child which you like, and which is really delightful, you have another one which is called a trickster, which is kind of a really mischievous child that causes all kinds of trouble for you. So it's a very complex system. and very powerful. So I recommend it very highly.
Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Roger, the next question is from Ayala. And so it's going to be Ayala, Sean, and Jeff, and Revent, actually. So Ayala, go ahead. Ayala, can you unmute yourself? Okay, Ayala is not here. So the next one, let me see, Revent. Revent, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually commented that it's been observed that like many times subpersonalities splinter off from your primary whole because of different kinds of traumas. And you know, there's also this like Nietzschean sense that, you know, you might the strength of man lies in kind of integrating these subpersonalities, you know, however they may have been created, and the Ubermensch, the superior man, is one who can kind of reconcile all of these. So I was just wondering if some of these ideas are reflected in Jordan Peterson's line of thought, or if he just ignores them completely.
No, I mean, that's actually, well, it's kind of interesting because you see Nietzsche reflected in Jung with the idea of the shadow, right? And the idea of that the purpose of life is to integrate all the parts of you that you haven't quite had access to and haven't quite mastered yet, right? And as you learn and master them and take control of them, you start to integrate them. And then from Jung, I mean, Peterson is a Jungian, and his main perspective is Jungian. So he actually takes on that general idea. And that's kind of why I said towards the end that your personality that is constantly satiated is constantly only satiated you. And, you know, you may think, oh, I'm actually a great, very nice and kind person. So, well, yeah, because you never had to do anything. You never had to fight anyone for a piece of meat. You've never had to, you know, walk 20 miles just to get water. You've never had to really fight for anything. Everything's always been provided for you. So how could you really claim that you actually know who or what you are? Right. So I do find some reflection of that between mastering yourself from, you know, mastering yourself and then creating your own meaning, and Peterson's view of, you know, very Jungian view of the shadow. I do think that Peterson, one of the few things that he disagrees with Nietzsche on is he doesn't believe that you can actually create your own meaning. He believes that that's actually not really the case. And he says it's like one of the main reasons is if you could, all of us would be amazing academics with six packs, right? Like if we could just choose what we wanted to be and we'd actually listen to ourselves, well, then we'd have control of ourselves. But the reality is, like, anytime you try to embody anything like that, parts of you will fight you. And so he kind of takes on the more Jungian approach of, well, then it's not so much that you need to create meaning or create, you know, yourself, but rather that you need to discover who you actually are, because there already seems to be a self there. You just need to know what it is. And it's more of a exploring and discovering of what you are rather than defining of what you are.
Okay, next question is from Sean. He requests me to read it out to you, Roger. He asks, would you say that the best application of understanding human psychology is to correct or modify all of one's specialized personalities to build an ego that is motivated by a positive vision to achieve one's life goals, as opposed to innate survival or procreation? And hopefully those life goals are altruistic and are supported by your community.
Yeah, so I guess, first and foremost is, in my opinion, maybe not. But for Peterson, I would say he falls much more on, he flips that on its side. He says, like, no, first and foremost, your entire system was already designed to follow a certain process. And within that process, certain rules emerge. And that process is the evolutionary process that then leads to a certain way of existing that becomes your moral code. And it's only way later that we cognitively conceptualize that process with rules, right? Rules as in, oh, well, this seems to happen, or this seems to be what works. But yeah, I would say it kind of flips it, as in, first and foremost, you do the moral thing that what he would call serves life in a Nietzschean sense, and that is the thing that progresses the thing that we are. And that is what defines your, altruism and everything else. That is what you're aiming at. So like, I would say that for Peterson, the causality is flipped on that. He believes that evolution, first and foremost, defines morals.
Excellent. Next question is from Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
So, so Roger, I would follow on that a little bit. I mean, I definitely also experienced that sense of progress, even illusory progress, fake or real, or maybe always both, to be is rewarded by a dose of dopamine. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the reasons why I personally seek to sustain a sense of life as a constant and never-ending adventure, and not allow any realization to be arrival at some final place of utopia. But I'm wondering, given, as you were noting, Peterson's sense that we have the power to develop our own subpersonalities based upon where we focus and the actions that we take, do we then have the ability, at least at a sub-personality level, to be constantly inventing and reinventing significant aspects of who we are and how we experience ourselves to be?
Yeah, so from the Peterson theory, from what I understand, is yes, but you're writing in permanent marker, right? So like, you can constantly keep inventing new ones, but as you're doing that, the ones that you continue to repeat, the ones that define your day-to-day, those are the ones that get codified and saved and start to really define you. And more importantly, though you may want to constantly be inventing new subpersonalities, the more you build, the more machines you already have ready that are already competing to try to do what they're made to do, right? So it's more a matter of, and we have a lot of like colloquial terms, like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's like, well, why? It's like, because the idea is like, it's already learned so many things that even if you did teach it, why would it choose the thing you taught it over all the other things it knows how to do? So it's more of like, like you're writing it in permanent marker, but yeah, technically you can always learn something new. It's just harder every time.
Well, there might be a lot of old dogs who, in response to the current dramatically changing environment, find that they're going to learn a few more new things than they otherwise might have imagined.
Yeah, necessity is the best teacher.
And mother of invention.
Yeah, right.
Wonderful. So on that note, let us continue the conversation in the breakout room. So